My name is Eleanor Hartley, Nell to the people who love me, and there used to be more of those, and I am 72 years old. A few months ago, a man I'd never met stood at my own kitchen counter, uncapped a fountain pen, and slid a stack of papers across the wood my late husband sanded with his own hands. My daughter-in-law was smiling the smile I'd learned to dread. They thought they were about to take everything I had. What they didn't know, what nobody in that kitchen knew, was that I'd already made one quiet phone call, and that the frightened old widow they'd come to bury had spent 40 years in an emergency room watching people lie about their pain. I knew that smile, and I was ready. If you're listening from somewhere far away, drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this has traveled. And please stay with me until the end. Because to tell you how I ended up at that counter and what I did next, I have to take you back 4 months to the night my son told me he was getting married again. I was up to my wrists in bread dough when Daniel called to say he was coming over and that he was bringing somebody he wanted me to meet. You have to understand what that meant to me. I'd been a widow for 3 years by then. My husband, Walt, dropped dead of a heart attack on the dock in the spring of 2023. 43 years into a marriage that still felt like it was getting started. One minute he was hosing salt off his boots and griping about the price of bait, and the next minute the whole world tipped sideways and never quite leveled out again. After the funeral, the house got very quiet. I'd worked the emergency room at Maine Medical for 40 years, charge nurse the last 15, and I'd built a whole life out of noise and motion and other people's emergencies. Then Walt died, and I retired the same year, and suddenly the loudest thing in my house was the refrigerator. So when my only child called and said, "Mom, I want you to meet someone," I about floated off the floor. "Who is she?" I said, trying not to sound like a woman who'd just been handed a reason to live. "Her name's Sloan," he said, "Sloan Whitcomb. Mom, she's really something. You're gonna love her." I had heard a little about Sloan already, the way you hear about a weather symptom before it gets to you. 35. Some kind of financial advisor. Wealth planning, Daniel said, like the words tasted expensive, always put together. Drove a car that cost more than my first house. I told myself none of that mattered. What mattered was that my boy sounded happy, and my boy hadn't sounded happy in a long, long time. Daniel was 39 that winter, and life had been chewing on him. His first marriage had come apart 4 years back. Not ugly, just tired, the way a rope frays when you keep pulling it the same direction. The one good thing he carried out of it was my granddaughter Lily, who was 8 and had her grandfather's stubborn chin and a laugh that could fix a bad day from across a room. Daniel had her every other week, and Daniel had his restaurant, this little farm-to-table place down on the waterfront that he'd poured himself into. Local fish, local greens, blueberry everything in the summer. He'd named it after his grandmother. I was so proud of him I could have burst. Every time I walked past that window with his name painted on it, that afternoon I drove to the market and bought the freshest things they had. Sea scallops, good butter, a bag of our own wild blueberries I'd put up the summer before. I made the blueberry buckle Daniel had loved since he was a boy, the one my own mother taught me, the one that filled the whole house with smells of warm fruit and cinnamon and made it feel for an hour like nobody in my family had ever died. I put on a soft blue dress. I did my hair. I even dug out a little lipstick. This woman might be the mother of more of my grandbabies someday. I wanted to do it right. The doorbell rang at 6, and my heart went up like a kite. Sloan Whitcomb was beautiful the way a magazine is beautiful. Every edge smoothed, nothing out of place, and something cool underneath the gloss. She wore a green silk blouse that probably cost what I used to clear in a week, and heels that clicked across my old pine floor like she was counting it. I opened my arms to hug her. She caught my shoulders with 2 fingertips, the way you'd hold something that might have a smell, and gave me a little squeeze that ended before it started. "So nice to finally meet you," she said. She did not quite look at me. Come in, honey. "You must be freezing," I said, because it was February and the wind off the harbor cuts right through you. I made a real dinner. "Daniel, did you tell her I made the buckle?" Daniel grinned at me, and for 1 second, he was my boy again. "She made the buckle," he told Sloan, like it was an event. Sloane's eyes were already moving around my living room. I watched her take it in. Walt's furniture, the worn arm of the couch, the photos crowding every surface, Lily's drawings stuck to the fridge with magnets shaped like lobsters. She wasn't looking at it like a guest. She was looking at it like an appraiser. I'd seen that look before, on insurance adjusters and estate people. The look of someone running numbers behind their eyes. This is so cozy, she said. You've been here a long time, I bet. 46 years, I said. Walt and I bought it the year we married. Raised Daniel in that back bedroom. She set her purse down like she was afraid of the chair. Have you ever thought about what it's worth now? The waterfront's gotten so hot. I laughed because I thought she was making conversation. I try not to think about money in my own living room, I said. Sit, eat, your skin and bones. Dinner was where I started to understand what I was dealing with. I'd ask her a question about her work, her family, how she and Daniel met, and I'd get back 3 words and a polite little wall. She pushed the scallops around her plate and didn't eat them. When I offered her a slice of the buckle, warm, with a scoop of vanilla melting down the side, she said, "Oh, none for me. I don't really do homemade." And I felt that word land somewhere under my ribs and stay there. Homemade, like it was a category of person. At one point I mentioned, just chatting, that I'd been careful with my savings, that Walt and I had always lived under our means. Your liquid assets, she corrected gently, smiling. Savings is just the part that's sitting still. I remember thinking, who talks like that at a dinner table? I remember letting it go. The only warm thing at that table was Lily, who Daniel had brought along. She climbed right into my lap between courses and told me a 40-minute story about a dog she'd seen at the harbor and asked could she sleep over Friday and ate 2 helpings of the buckle Sloane wouldn't touch. I looked at my granddaughter's blueberry-stained mouth and her father's happy, exhausted face and Sloane's careful, watching eyes, and I thought, the way a nurse thinks when the numbers on the monitor are fine, but the patient looks wrong. Something here doesn't add up. I just didn't know yet what it was. Over the next few weeks, I learned that Sloane Whitcomb did not so much join my family as quietly reorganize it. The wedding was going to be small, she said, just close people. And somehow in all the planning, nobody ever asked me a single thing. I offered to bake the cake. I'd bake the cake for every wedding and christening and graduation in our family for 50 years. It's a thing we do. And Sloane laughed a light little laugh and said, "Oh, that's so sweet, but we're using a real pastry chef. Real. Like mine came out of a can. I'd call to talk to Daniel and get her instead. He slammed at the restaurant, Nell," she'd say, and that was the only time she used my name, when she was closing a door with it. Once I heard her in the background of a call telling someone, "No, that's just Daniel's mother. She can handle the flowers." Daniel's mother, like a job title, like the woman who does the flowers. And the sleepovers stopped. Lily begged for them. I heard her on the phone. "Please, Sloane, please, can I see Grandma?" And somehow there was always a reason, a schedule, a thing. The one person in that family who reached for me with both hands, and the door kept closing on her too. I want to be fair even now. I told myself I was a jealous old woman, that every mother-in-law in history has thought the new wife was cold, that I was making a villain out of a stranger, because I was lonely and afraid of being replaced. I'm a nurse. I don't like a diagnosis I can't back up. So I waited. I watched. I gave her every benefit of the doubt I had. I gave it all the way up to the wedding, which is where the doubt ran out. The wedding was at a pretty little event barn out past Falmouth, white lights, and burlap and mason jars, the whole 9 yards. I wore a deep purple dress I'd bought just for the day and had my hair done at Carol's. And Carol said, "Nell, you look 10 years younger." And for about an hour, I believed her. Then I got to the barn and found out where I was sitting. 5th row, behind Sloane's co-workers, behind a row of people I'd never laid eyes on. The groom's mother, the woman who had stayed up 40 straight hours when Daniel had pneumonia at 6, who'd worked Christmas morning so he could have a bike, was seated behind a junior associate from Sloane's office who I later learned Daniel had met exactly twice. From where they put me, I had to lean into the aisle to see my own son say his vows. It got worse at the reception. Sloane walked me around to a few people and introduced me as, "This is Daniel's mom. She was a nurse, I think. 40 years. When the toasts came, she ran them like a stage manager. Her father, her sister, her maid of honor, her boss. And when somebody finally said, "Doesn't the groom's mother want to say something?" Sloan glanced at me and said, "Oh, sure, Nell can say a quick word, a quick word." I stood up with the whole speech I'd written, the one about watching Daniel grow, about his father, about how proud Walt would have been, and I got 2 sentences in before Sloan started the applause, and everyone followed her, and my voice just disappeared under the clapping. I sat back down, I smoothed my dress, I smiled until my face hurt. They sat me at a back table with Sloane's second cousins, who talked across me like I was an empty chair. I watched my son dance with his bride, then his bride's mother, then his bride's sisters, then a coworker. An old friend of the family, a fella named Anthony, stopped by my table and said, "Nell, isn't Danny gonna dance with his mama?" And I laughed and said, "Oh, in a bit," and in a bit never came. The song ended and another started, and he never once looked my way. Around 11, I gathered my purse, and the gift I'd wrapped so carefully and went to find him to say goodnight. I touched his arm. "I'm gonna head home, sweetheart." He hugged me fast, his eyes already back on the lights and the music. "Thanks for coming, Mom. Love you." But he was looking somewhere else. And then Sloane was there, the way she always appeared, like a shadow that had been waiting. "Thanks so much for coming, Nell," she said, and her voice had a finished sound to it, like the end of a meeting. As I walked out to the lot, I heard her say to a knot of her friends, "Not quite quiet enough. Good thing she lives close, but not too close, you know. Mothers-in-law. They always want to vote." And the little laugh went up behind me all the way to my car. I drove home along the harbor in the dark, the light smearing in the windshield because I was crying and too proud to pull over. There was a song on the radio that Walt used to hum, and I thought, in one evening, I went from the woman who raised that boy to a problem somebody finally solved. I didn't know yet that the solving had only just begun. After the wedding, the phone went dead for a week. No call about the honeymoon. They took a long weekend in Quebec. No thank you, nothing. I told myself they were busy, newlyweds. I baked a batch of chocolate walnut cookies, Daniel's favorite since he was a kid, just to have an excuse, and I drove them over to the new place they'd rented in Cape Elizabeth. And Sloane opened the door in a silk robe and took the tin out of my hands without inviting me past the mat. "Oh, Nell, what a surprise." She inspected the cookies like she was looking for something. "Danny's on a work call. I'll let him know you stopped by." And the door closed, soft as you please, and I stood on the step like a delivery girl who'd brought the wrong order. When she finally did start calling me, it was never to talk. It was always with a purpose, dressed up as concern. "Nell," she said one afternoon, in that warm syrup voice she could turn on like a tap. "Daniel and I were talking, and we just worry about you in that big house all alone. Have you ever thought about downsizing? Somewhere easier to manage at your age?" "I manage fine, honey," I said. "Of course you do now. We just want to get ahead of things. You sell the house, you free up all that equity, you could travel, and we could help you put the money somewhere it actually works for you, instead of just sitting in a savings account doing nothing." There was that word again, hiding in the soft talk. Help. I started to notice that every time Sloane said help, something of mine went missing in the sentence. I kept my voice easy and gave her nothing. 40 years in an emergency room teaches you a thing most people never learn. When something's wrong, you do not panic and you do not move fast. You gather information first. You find out what you're actually dealing with before you touch it. So I let her think the pressure was working. "I'll think about it, sweetheart," I'd say, and I'd think about it, all right. I'd think about it plenty. Then Daniel came over alone, and that was worse than anything Sloane ever did. He sat on the couch where I used to hold him through nightmares, and he wouldn't look at me, same as when he was little and had broken something and was working up the nerve to tell me. He had the speech, and it wasn't his. The words were too smooth, too advised. "Mom, Sloane and I have been talking about your future. We think the house is too much for you. You seem tired lately, stressed. Sloane knows a great agent who could get you top dollar." "Do you think I should sell my house, Daniel?" I asked him, straight. "Not Sloane, you." And for just a second, I saw him, the real boy, hesitating, caught between what he knew in his bones and what his wife had poured into his ear. Well, he mumbled, she's got a point, Mom. You should enjoy yourself. Worry less. But he said it like he was reading it off a card, and I'd taught that boy to read, and I knew the difference between a person and a script. That night, I sat in my kitchen with a cup of chamomile, and I thought about something Walt said to me near the end, though neither of us knew it was the end. We'd been arguing about money, a small thing, a roof repair, and he'd taken my hand and said, Nellie, if anything ever happens to me, don't you let anybody push you around. You've got more than you think you do. Promise me you'll remember that. I'd laughed it off. I wished I hadn't. And then, this is where it really started. Lily forgot her coat at my house. She'd been over for one of the rare afternoons Sloan couldn't block, and she'd left her little puffy coat on the hook by the door. I picked it up to call Daniel about it, and out of habit, I checked the pockets. You always check a kid's pockets. You find the strangest things. And I pulled out a folded piece of paper, soft from being carried around. It was a drawing on the front, crayon, my house lopsided and loved with a big red heart over it. I smiled, and then I turned it over. The back of the page was a printout, a county property record, a land search, the kind you pull from the Registry of Deeds online, parcels, acreage, and assessor's valuation. And the parcel it described in black and white was land in Washington County, Maine, Hartley land, Walt's family, ground down east. I stared at it for a long minute before the date at the top of the printout swam into focus. It had been generated in early January, 2 weeks before Sloan Whitcomb ever set foot in my living room, 2 weeks before she met Daniel's family. Before she met Daniel, near enough has made no difference. Sloan hadn't fallen for my son and then learned his family had land. She had found the land first. I sat down on the floor of my own front hall, right there with the coat in my lap, because my legs wouldn't hold me. Every cold smile, every appraising glance around my living room, every liquid assets, and have you thought about what it's worth? It all turned over in my mind and showed me its other face. The whole thing had been a transaction from the start. My son was the down payment. The drawing must have gotten mixed up with Sloan's papers somewhere, and Lily, being 8, had grabbed a sheet off the printer to draw on, never knowing what was on the back. A child's heart over my house on the other side of a hunter's map. I didn't sleep that night. Toward dawn, I did something I hadn't done in 3 years. I dragged Walt's old safe out of the bedroom closet. The heavy gray one he'd bolted to the floor and I'd never had the heart to open. And I worked the combination, our anniversary, and I went through every piece of paper inside. Birth certificates, our marriage license, the deed to this house, Walt's life insurance, and at the very back in a manila envelope gone soft at the corners, the deed to the Hartley land. I'd known about it, the way you know about a thing you've never had to think about. Walt's Aunt Edith had left it to him when she passed, back in the 90s. To Walt, it was just the family ground, a few hundred acres of wild blueberry barrens and a long, rocky stretch of coast out past Jonesport, Granite, and Spruce and Fog. He leased the barrens cheap to a berry cooperative every year, the way his uncle had, and we drove out maybe once a summer to walk the fields and let the wind beat us up a little. 320 acres, the deed said. I'd never once thought about what it was worth, because Walt never talked about it like it was worth anything. It was just ours. Behind the deed was a second envelope, my name on the front in Walt's blocky carpenter's printing, sealed. I almost couldn't open it. When I finally did, my hands were shaking like the new nurse's hands their first night. Nell, it said, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and I'm sorry I'm not there to say this out loud. A developer's been calling about the Down East land for 2 years now. I never told you because I didn't want to fight about selling Edith's barrens. But I had it looked at. Nell, that land is worth a lot more than this old fisherman ever let on. Whatever happens, don't let anyone talk you into thinking you're a poor old woman who needs taking care of. You're not. You've got more than you think, and you're stronger than you let yourself be. If anybody ever comes at you over money, you call a lawyer named Diane Mercer in Portland. Tell her you're my wife. She'll know what to do. I love you. You were always the brave one. Walt, I read it 4 times. Then I sat on the closet floor in the gray morning light, And I cried, not the helpless way I'd cried driving home from the wedding, but a different way. The way you cry when a door you thought was a wall turns out to have a handle on it. My husband, 3 years in the ground, had reached out his hand and given me a weapon. There was one more thing I had to know before I called anyone, and I'm not proud of how I found it out, but I'd do it again. I drove down to the restaurant on a Tuesday, in the slow afternoon hours, to try to make peace with my son. The hostess said he was in the back office, and I walked toward it, and through the cracked door I heard his voice, low and tight, and I stopped. He was on the phone. I know. I'm going to have it to you by the 30th, I swear to God. A pause. Look, man, I'm tapped out, okay? The whole place is in the red. If I could squeeze blood from a stone, I would. His voice cracked on the last word, and my heart cracked right along with it. He hung up. And then I heard Sloane. I hadn't even known she was back there, and her voice was the syrup, the warm tap, but I was hearing it through new ears now. Hey, look at me, it's going to be fine. Once your mother's situation is handled, all of this just goes away, okay? The debt, the stress, all of it. We just have to get her to see it's the best thing for her too. She's not going to sell that house, Daniel said, miserable. It's where she will, Sloane said. People do when the alternative is scarier. Trust me, this is literally what I do. I backed away from the door before they saw me. I made it out to the parking lot and sat in my car with both hands on the wheel and the engine off, and I'll tell you the truth. I felt the floor go out from under me a second time. Because here was the thing I'd been hiding from. My son wasn't a brainwashed bystander. He wasn't a victim of Sloane the way I'd wanted to believe, some hypnotized innocent. He was $340,000 in debt, and he was drowning. And he had let his wife load a weapon and aim it at his own mother because he couldn't see another way to shore. Once your mother's situation, my situation, like I was a leak in the boat. And the terrible part, the part that's hard to say even now, is that knowing he was desperate didn't make me hate him. It made me grieve him. Sloane was a stranger with a plan. I could fight a stranger all day, but that frightened, ashamed man in the back office was my boy, and he was choosing this, and there's no lawyer on earth who can fix that. I drove home, and that night I made the only call that mattered. Not to Diane Mercer yet, to Margie. Marguerite Doyle has been my best friend for 40 years. We raised our kids 2 streets apart, taught and nursed our way through the same recessions, buried our husbands 11 months apart. She's a retired school teacher, which means she's got a spine like rebar and zero tolerance for nonsense. I told her everything, the wedding, the calls, the drawing, the printout, the office, and finally the land and Walt's letter. There was a long silence on the line. Then Margie said, quiet and hard, Nell, 300 acres on the coast and a developer sniffing around, and you've been letting that gold digger and her sad sack notary push you toward a nursing home. I didn't know what it was worth. Well, now you do, and listen to me. Her voice dropped into the tone she used to use on the back row of her classroom. Don't you dare warn them. Don't you tell that woman one single thing about that land. Vultures only show their faces when they think you're already dead. You let her keep thinking you're roadkill, and you get yourself a lawyer, and you don't sign one piece of paper without me in the room. You hear me? I hear you, Margie. Tomorrow we're going to see this Diane Mercer. I'll drive. And just like that, a retired nurse and a retired school teacher went to war. Diane Mercer's office was downtown, all dark wood and diplomas, and Diane herself was a wiry woman of about 58 with reading glasses on a chain and eyes that didn't miss a thing. She listened to my whole story without interrupting once, just taking notes, and when I got to Walt's letter, she stopped writing and looked up. Walter Hartley, she said softly. I did some work for his Aunt Edith years back. He came to me once about the land. Good man. She took her glasses off. Mrs. Hartley, I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to hear it clearly. What you've described to me is not a difficult daughter-in-law. It has a name. It's called financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, and it is a crime in this state. She had me pull out the deed, and she made a call, and 2 days later she had a fresh appraisal on her desk. The Baron's lease alone brought in steady income every season. But the oceanfront parcel, 3,000 feet of deep water coast, the kind they don't make any more of, with the developer interest already on record, put the whole property well into the millions. I sat there looking at a number with too many zeros, and I thought of Walt in his rubber boots calling it the family ground. Here's what concerns me about the pattern, Diane said, spreading my bank statements out next to the deed. Isolation first, cutting you off from the people who'd notice. Then the message, repeated until you believe it. You can't handle your own affairs. Then a friendly professional who shows up to simplify everything. Then a rushed signing. I've seen people lose their entire lives in one afternoon at a kitchen table. She tapped the deed. We are not going to let that happen to you. We're going to do three things. We're going to put your estate, the house, the accounts, and especially this land, into an irrevocable trust where no one can touch it. We're going to document everything. And when they come at you again, you're going to let them, on your terms, with a recorder running and the right people standing by. I left that office feeling something I hadn't felt since Walt died. I felt like myself. But Diane wasn't done surprising me, and neither was the world. A week later, she called me back in, and there was a different look on her face, sharper, almost angry. I ran some names, she said. Roy Tanner, the notary your daughter-in-law's been using. He shows up in a complaint file from last year. An elderly client from Brunswick, whose accounts got consolidated for safekeeping and then drained. Nothing stuck, but he's known. And your daughter-in-law's advisory practice. She slid a paper across the desk, is not exactly squeaky clean either. Then she had me bring my bank statements to a meeting with a man named Greg Halloran, a fraud officer at my own bank, a big, easygoing guy who turned out to be anything but easygoing about his job. He flipped through my accounts, stopped on a line, and turned it around to me. Mrs. Hartley, did you authorize this? It was a small transfer, a couple $100, set up 2 months back. I remembered it vaguely. Sloan had walked me through signing something to set up automatic help with the bills, so you don't have to worry. A test, a toe in the water to see if I'd notice. We already flagged it, Greg said. It tripped one of our patterns. Small unexplained transfer, elderly account holder, a new authorized contact added the same week. We see this exact playbook, a couple times a month. He shook his head. I'll be honest with you. We were hoping you'd come in. I sat there between Diane and Greg and felt the whole shape of it shift. I'd thought I was a lonely old woman building a quiet defense all by herself. I wasn't. The bank had been watching. The notary was already in a file. There were other people before me that this couple had hurt or tried to. The trap I thought I was setting alone was already half built by everyone Sloan Whitcomb had run her playbook on before she ever found us. I wasn't the first. I was just going to be the last. Pat Sullivan from Adult Protective Services opened a file. Margie lent me a little voice recorder her grandson had outgrown and showed me which button to press. And then I did the hardest thing of all. I went back to living my ordinary life. I gardened. I went to church. I took Sloane's calls and let her hear an old woman softening, wearing down, coming around. Maybe you're right, honey. Maybe it is too much house. I felt like I was running a code in the ER again, patient crashing, the whole room loud and scared, and me with my heart rate at 60, hands steady, voice flat and calm, because the calm is what keeps the patient alive. I scheduled the meeting myself, my kitchen, my terms, and I quietly asked Diane and Pat and Greg to stay near their phones that afternoon. I'll be honest about the night I almost called it all off, because if I tell you I was made of steel, the whole time I'll be lying, and you'll know it. Lily called me crying, because she'd asked to sleep over, and Sloan had said no, flat, mean, we've talked about this. And then 20 minutes later, Daniel called, and his voice was so tired, so worn down to the nub, that he barely sounded like a grown man. Mom, he said, I'm so tired. I'm so tired of all of it. Can you just help us, please? I don't know what else to do. And God help me, I almost did. Not because I was fooled, I knew exactly what help meant by then. But because I'm his mother, and a mother's body doesn't care about evidence. My hand was actually on the phone to call Diane and say, stop, call it off. I'll just give him whatever he wants. The hardest enemy I faced in this whole thing was never Sloan Whitcomb. It was the part of me that would have burned my own house down to make my boy stop hurting. I made myself read Walt's letter again. You were always the brave one. I put the phone down and I waited for Saturday. They came at 2 o'clock on a gray Saturday, right on time, the way you keep an appointment you've been looking forward to. Sloan in a cream coat, carrying a leather folder like a closing argument, Daniel pale, not meeting my eyes, and behind them Roy Tanner, a thin man with a sparse mustache and a briefcase and a smile that never got anywhere near his eyes. He shook my hand with a cold, dry palm. Mrs. Hartley, pleasure. Let's get you all squared away today, nice and easy. The faster we get through it, the fewer headaches for everybody. I sat them down at my kitchen table, Walt's table, the wood he'd planed himself, and I played my part, the frail, hopeful, easily confused old lady. I'd had 40 years of watching frightened patients to study from. I did it well. Sloan opened the folder and fanned the papers out like cards. Okay, Nell, so we kept it really simple for you. This first one's the listing agreement for the house. This one moves the proceeds into a family trust, so it's all protected and managed in one place. This one's a financial power of attorney, just so Daniel and I can handle the paperwork side, and you don't have to stress about any of it. And she slid over a glossy brochure, a building with too many flowers in front. This is Harborview. It's a gorgeous assisted living community. Yoga, a movie room, medical staff right there. You'd be so safe, safe. Stripped of my house, my money, and my front door and called safe. You just sign here, here, and here, Royce said, and uncapped a heavy gold pen and set it in front of me on the table like he was laying down a winning hand. And that's when I glanced down at my apron pocket, where Margie's little recorder was supposed to be running, and saw that the tiny red light had gone dark. The battery was dead. I have lived through a lot of bad seconds in an emergency room. The monitor flatlining, the family screaming, the moment you realize the thing you tried isn't working. This was that. No recording. My safety net gone. And Diane and Pat weren't due for another 10 minutes at least. It was just me, an old woman in an apron, and 3 people who'd come to take everything I had, and not one scrap of proof being captured. So I did what I'd done 100 times in that ER when an instrument failed mid-procedure. I didn't freeze. I bought time. I picked up the gold pen, turned it over in my fingers like it fascinated me, and set it back down. Now, Roy, I said in my quaveriest old lady voice, you'll have to forgive me. My eyes aren't what they were. Would you read me each of these out loud? Every line. So I understand just what I'm putting my name to. An old woman has to be careful, doesn't she? Sloane's jaw tightened. I saw it, just a flicker. But what could she say? She'd spent 4 months telling everyone how fragile and confused I was. She could hardly object to me being careful now. And Roy, fool that he was proud of his paperwork. He started to read slowly, droning through the clauses, and I asked him to repeat things, and I asked what a word meant, and I poured everybody coffee with shaking hands and spilled a little on purpose, and the whole time my heart was going like a trip hammer, and my face was as calm as a Sunday. Their own thoroughness, the very thing they'd built to trap me, I turned into the rope I climbed out on. One clause, another. Could you read that part again, dear? About the power of attorney? And then the doorbell rang. Sloane's head snapped up. Are you expecting somebody? No, I said, getting up slow. Probably a neighbor. I opened my front door and the cavalry walked in. It wasn't a TV courtroom. There were no flashing lights, no detectives kicking the door in. It was something better because it was real. Diane Mercer in her good coat with her briefcase, and behind her Pat Sullivan from Adult Protective Services with a state ID on a lanyard, and behind her Greg Halloran from the bank, looking like a man who'd been waiting a long time for this particular Saturday. Margie brought up the rear, chin out, daring anybody to say a word. Roy Tanner went the color of paste and reached for his briefcase. Sloane stood up so fast her chair scraped. What is this? Daniel, what's going on? Good afternoon, Diane said pleasantly, setting her case on the table next to the papers. Diane Mercer. I'm Mrs. Hartley's attorney. This is Patricia Sullivan from Adult Protective Services and Mr. Halloran from the bank's fraud unit. I understand a signing was scheduled for this afternoon. I trust all the documents are in order and that my client's been given adequate time to review them with independent counsel, which, as of 2 weeks ago, she has. The silence in that kitchen was the thickest thing I have ever felt, You could have cut it and served it on a plate. Then I went to the bedroom and brought out the safe. I set it on Walt's table among their papers, worked the combination, and took out the deed to the Down East land, and I laid it down right on top of Sloane's brochure for Harborview. Before anybody signs anything, I said, and my voice wasn't quavering anymore, I think there's a document of mine we ought to look at too. Diane, would you read the appraised value? Out loud, every line, so everybody understands just what I'm putting my name to. Dan picked it up and a smile touched the corner of her mouth. 320 acres in Washington County, she read. Active Blueberry Barrens lease loss. 3,000 feet of developable oceanfront with a standing biller offer on record. Most recent Ray's appraisal. And she said the number, the one with too many zeros, and let it sit in the air. I have never in my life watched a face change the way Sloane Whitcomb's changed. The cool slid right off it. Underneath was something raw and disbelieving and almost childlike, the face of a person watching a winning lottery ticket blow out of her hand into the sea. And one more thing she should know, Diane added, mild as milk. Mrs. Hartley placed her entire estate, house, accounts, and this land into an irrevocable trust 2 weeks ago. It's untouchable, not by a power of attorney, not by a marriage, not by anyone. She looked at Sloane over her glasses. And the named future beneficiary of the land trust is not Daniel, it's his daughter, Lily. Walt, 3 years dead, a lobsterman in rubber boots who'd never met this woman, had reached out of the grave and checkmated her cold. Sloane tried. I'll give her that. She put on a laugh that came out, cracked it. Okay, there's clearly been a big misunderstanding here. We're just trying to help Nell with some paperwork. That's all this is. Paperwork. I stood up out of my chair, and I felt every one of my 72 years, and I didn't feel old at all. Is that what we're calling it? Selling my house out from under me, moving my money where you two hold the keys, and filing me away in a brochure with a yoga room. That's paperwork. I set Margie's dead little recorder on the table, right next to the gold pen, like a grenade with the pin out. They didn't know it was dead. Let them wonder. I spent 40 years telling families the truth in the worst hour of their lives. Don't you dare insult me with the easy version of yours. Greg Halloran spoke up, calm and certain. For the record, the bank flagged an unauthorized pattern transfer on this account 2 months ago. We've been monitoring since. Pat Sullivan added, quiet and official, Adult Protective Services has an open exploitation case on this matter as of last week. And Diane, almost gently, and Miss Tanster, you might want to know your name is already attached to a prior complaint out of Brunswick. I'd think hard about what you say next. Roy Tanner bolted for the door, and Greg just stepped sideways and stood in front of it, arms folded, and Roy stopped like he'd hit glass. And then Sloane Whitcomb did the cruelest, truest thing of the whole afternoon. She turned to my son, and the mask came all the way off, and she said, Don't you stand there looking shocked, Daniel. This was your idea, too. You begged me to fix this, so don't you put it all on me. And Daniel, my Daniel, couldn't say a word, because it was true, and we all knew it was true, and the not denying was its own confession. The whole kitchen went silent and looked at him. I had imagined this moment for weeks. I had pictured it as a victory. It did not feel like a victory. It felt like holding a stranger who used to be my son. He sat down in Walt's chair like his strings had been cut, and then, in front of God and the bank and Adult Protective Services, my 39-year-old boy put his face in his hands and broke apart. The debt came out of him in pieces, the restaurant in the red, the creditors, the shame, the nights he'd lain awake telling himself it was for her own good, that he wasn't stealing from his mother, he was protecting her, until he'd believed his own lie because the truth was unsurvivable. He looked up at me with his face wet, and for 1 second he was 6 years old again, standing over something he'd broken, knowing he couldn't fix it, terrified of what he'd see in my face. What he saw in my face, I hope, was grief, because that's what was there, not triumph, grief. They left, all of them, Roy first scuttling, Sloane after, not bothering with the mask anymore, already on her phone before she hit the driveway, working the next angle, the way water finds the next crack. Daniel lingered at the door and looked at me and said, Mom, can we talk later? And for the first time in 4 months, the question sounded real and naked and not written by anybody. I nodded. I promised him nothing. There's a difference. And then it was just me and my real family, Margie and Diane and Greg packing up his folder in my kitchen. And for the first time in months, I felt safe in my own house. After they'd gone too, I started picking up and I found one more thing. Lily had left her overnight bag by the couch from a visit weeks before. Sloan had never let her come back for it. I unzipped it to set her things aside, and on top, folded careful the way an 8-year-old folds something important, was a drawing. My house again. The big red heart again. And underneath, in shaky, uneven letters, a child sounds out one at a time, let them take Grandma's house. I sat down on the floor for the second time in this story, because I understood, all at once, what I'd missed. That first drawing, the one whose backside had blown the whole thing open, the land record I'd been so proud of finding. I'd seen the little house and the heart on the front of it, and I'd smiled and thought, isn't that sweet? And turned it straight over to the important grown-up side. I'd read it as a doodle. It wasn't a doodle. It was the first draft of this. My granddaughter, 8 years old, had heard the grown-ups talking in their low voices, had understood more than any of them knew, and had been trying in the only language she had, crayon, a red heart, 4 desperate words, to warn the one person too proud and too lonely to listen. Sloan had blocked every visit since, so this second drawing, the one that said it plain, never made it out of the bag. Lily had been holding up a sign for months, and I'd smiled at the heart and missed every word. That was 3 months ago. It's autumn now, and I want to tell you the true ending, not the pretty one, because you've stayed with me this long and you deserve the truth. Sloan Whitcomb is under an active state investigation. Her advisory license is suspended. Roy Tanner's was revoked outright when the Brunswick complaint and my case came together, and Pat Sullivan's office passed the file up the line. There were no handcuffs in my driveway. That's not how it works in real life. It's slower and quieter and grinding, paperwork answering paperwork. But it is real and it is happening, and the network they ran on a string of frightened old people is coming apart one file at a time. Sloan filed for divorce the week she learned. The land was locked away from her forever. She left Portland not long after, looking for the next family with land and a son who's drowning, I expect. People like that don't reform. They relocate. Daniel's restaurant closed in September. The name he'd painted so proud is gone from the window. And here is the part the pretty version always gets wrong. I did not run into his arms and forgive him. I love my son. I will love him until they put me next to Walt. But love and trust are 2 different accounts, and one of them was overdrawn. He comes by on Sundays now, alone, and we are careful with each other, like 2 people learning to walk on a leg that's been broken and set. A few weeks ago, he stood in my kitchen and said, "Mom, I don't even know how to start apologizing for what I did. It's like I was hypnotized. I couldn't see what was right in front of me. And I told him the truest thing I know, the thing this whole year taught me. Daniel, forgiveness isn't something you ask for. It's something you earn, slowly, with what you do, not what you say. And I'm not there yet. I want you to hear that honestly, because I'm done with the easy version of things. But you can start. You can start by being Lily's father instead of somebody's solution." He nodded. He didn't argue. He didn't perform. He just nodded and went home and came back the next Sunday. That's the only proof I'll accept now. The coming back. We are not healed. We have only stopped lying to each other. After this year, believe me, that feels like a miracle. I help him in exactly one way, and it's not for him. I cover a small monthly arrangement that keeps things steady for Lily. Her school, her routine, the soft landing a kid deserves when the adults around her have made a wreck of things. Not Daniel's debts, Lily's stability. He understands the line and he doesn't push it, and that's the most hopeful thing about him these days. I drove out to the land last week as its true and only owner, for the first time since Walt died. It was the turn of the season, and the barrens had gone the deep wine red they go in the fall, 300 acres of it rolling down toward the granite. And the fog was sitting out on the water the way it does, and the whole place smelled of salt and spruce and the last of the ripe fruit. I stood in the middle of Edith's old fields in the wind that had beaten Walt and me up so many summers, and I thought, The family ground. He'd been right. I had more than I ever believed. I'd just been waiting for somebody's permission to know it. I'm not going to tell you I became some great crusader. That's not the truth, and you'd be right not to believe it. I leased the barrens, the way Walt did, the way his uncle did before him. I'm leaving the coast wild. They're not making any more of it, and Lily's going to want a place that's still hers someday. And I started one small, real thing. Once a month, I sit down with the folks at the local area agency on aging in a church basement with bad coffee, and I talk plainly to other women my age who are being managed by their families, who are hearing you can't handle your own money, and wouldn't you be safer somewhere else, and feeling themselves turn slowly into furniture in their own homes. Margie comes with me. I don't get letters from far off places, I get neighbors. That's plenty. I didn't get my son back. Not all the way, maybe not ever, all the way. But I got something I'd lost a lot longer ago than 4 months. I got myself back, and at 72, it turns out that was the part worth saving. My name is Eleanor Hartley. Walt was right about the land, and he was right about me. I had more than I believed, and I was stronger than I'd let myself be. I just had to stop waiting for the world to hand me permission to know it. And I'll tell you one last thing, free of charge, from a woman who spent 40 years watching people in the worst hour of their lives. I am nobody's logistics problem. And neither are you.
Okay, I have to be honest with you, Sayaldang. I keep coming back to one small thing in Nell's story. And it isn't the land, and it isn't the lawyers. It's the crayon drawing. An 8-year-old kid saw what every single adult in that house was pretending not to see. I think that's the part that's going to stay with me. We tell ourselves that helping our parents, helping the older people in our lives to live means taking the wheel, handling their money, their house, their choices for their own good. But there's a thin, thin line between protecting somebody and erasing them. Real help asks a person what they want. Control just decides for them. So here's what I'd ask you to do today. If there's an older person in your life, maybe today's the day you call them half, and don't ask what they need handled. Ask what they actually want, and tell me down in the comments, where's the line for you between helping and taking over? I'll see you in the next story.